It's the law of supply and demand. The reason that these organizations keep producing and exporting and selling these drugs is that there's a huge demand, not only here in the US, but in Europe as well. The open borders have caused, significant harm to the United States because you've seen for years that millions of people have come into the US. They haven't been vetted. We don't know who they are. Some could be terrorists, others have criminal records, and the problem is that these cartels that are operating in Mexico as well, they're going to do anything that they can to make money, right? That's their job. That's why they exist. And human trafficking is a major problem. It's a major moneymaker for these drug cartels in the United States. And once these individuals get into the United States, they don't have a professional background. They don't have, some of them, a good education. So what do? They resort to crime, and they resort to drug trafficking and other crimes to make money so that they can exist and survive. So it's a multifaceted problem.
Hey, let's welcome Chris Feistl, author of After Escobar, who was also portrayed in season 3 of Narcos on Netflix. Very interesting personality, and welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
Hey, Danny, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I usually start with a story of my guests, so if you want to give a little bit of a background of who you are and what you did, and then we can kind of move from there. Today, I want to tell you about a book I'm reading. It's written by 25 veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, all graduates of the Masters of Business for Veterans program at the University of Southern California. The book is called Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation. It collects the personal stories of veterans written in their own words. Pick it up for yourself or a veteran you love. Check out the link in the description for 10% off.
Okay. Well, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I really didn't have any kind of vision of working in law enforcement at the time. I went to college. I played basketball in college. I majored in criminal justice and political science. And, I always aspired to be an attorney. And in the summer of my junior year in college, I got a part-time job during the summer as a seasonal police officer down in Wildwood, New Jersey. And during that time, I had a chance to work undercover. I was approached in a bar by a young woman who wanted to sell me methamphetamine. So we set up an undercover deal, and that's kind of like really put me on that path of being in law enforcement. And, I thought that was a pretty cool thing to do. And I looked into DEA, some of the other federal agencies, and I applied, and I got hired by DEA in 1988.
So you got hired 1988, and how long did you serve in the DEA?
I worked for 26 years with DEA, and I retired in 2014.
Got it. And after that, you got involved with Netflix and some other TV shows. So did you want to do that all along? Did you want to get involved with the media side of things, or how did that play out?
No, not at all. I mean, I didn't really have any aspirations or any ideas or dreams of doing that. What happened was, Narcos came out, season 1 and season 2. The DEA agents portrayed in seasons 1 and season 2 were Javier Pena and Steve Murphy, both good friends of mine. And as Netflix evolved and the popularity of that show really grew, the Netflix writers thought that they would spin off to a third season, which would encompass the Cali cartel, which I was involved in. And they asked who would be a good person to talk to. Steve and Javier threw my name out. They had done some research as well. They read a book by William Rempel called At the Devil's Table, which had a lot of good insight into the Cali cartel. So they were very well prepared. I went out to Santa Monica. I talked to the Netflix writers, told them exactly what happened, and decided to go with season 3, which was focusing on the Cali cartel. And of course, that parlayed into a few other television shows, such as Finding Escobar's Millions, where we went down into Colombia and for 6 episodes, and we kind of tore up the country looking for a lot of Pablo's buried treasure and money that he had hid. So, I really didn't have any ideas about going into any of the media stuff, but it kind of just fell into place.
So for those, and that would include me, who didn't watch the season 3 of the show, just to get an idea, like who were you portrayed as, or like what role did your character play in that show?
So in season 3, I was one of the DEA agents that was sent from Miami, Florida to Colombia to work with Colombian security forces to go after the Cali cartel. So my character is a DEA agent named Chris Feistl, and I work alongside in the show Javier Pena, and my partner in the show is Daniel Van Ness, but his real name is Dave Mitchell. But Dave was still actively working with the DEA at the time, so they couldn't use his name. So he was quite upset that he didn't get the exposure in Narcos season 3. They had to use a different name.
So, how close was the show to what really happened? Because I've seen many interviews with, people who were like in the mafia movies or something like that, and they say, hey, that wasn't really how it was in real life or things like that. So, in your opinion, was it close to the reality, or did the writers change certain things to make it look better or whatever?
Well, with season 3, you had a lot of historical things that took place, such as the financing of the 1994 presidential campaign, some of the people involved there. So it was pretty accurate, but as in any show that you're making for television, it's entertainment, right? So the writers have creative liberties, they have ideas on how they want the show to go, and they have different arcs for different things. So the show in and of itself was pretty accurate, although there were some things that were dramatized, obviously for television.
And do you get any royalties for your part, or how does this work in terms of payments and things like that? Because you didn't play your role, you were just kind of consulting them. So did you get rewarded for that, or how does that work?
So I was brought on as a consultant, as well as them being able to utilize my name, image, and likeness, so to say. So they had an actor who portrayed me. Now, you brought up a good question and regarding royalties, and I'll tell you what, as popular as that show was, I really wish that I did get some royalties from that. But generally, how it works with those shows, at least with Netflix, is that they will buy your life rights, right? So you tell them your story, you tell them what happened, and that they will give you a certain amount of money to utilize your name and to use your story in the show. But no, I didn't get any royalties.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And let's talk about what you actually did as you worked in the DEA. My understanding is that you were in Latin America at the time after Pablo Escobar, and you wrote a book called After Escobar. So, what happened after he went down, and what did you do there at that time?
Pablo Escobar was killed in 1993 in December. And after that, and even several years before that, there was another cartel that was on the rise in Colombia, and that was the Cali cartel. So after Pablo was killed, every resource within the US government as well as in the Colombian government was put together to go after the Cali cartel. So me and my partner, Dave Mitchell, we were sent from Miami to Colombia to work on a special task force created to target the 4 leaders of the Cali cartel, also known as the Cali Godfathers. So when we got there in 1994 in the summer, we worked with a variety of different Colombian security forces to go after those 4 leaders of the Cali cartel and to do our best to dismantle that entire organization. So that's what we did from 1994 until we left in 1997.
So you worked with the local government or a government at that time to kind of collaborate and to track and to eliminate the leaders of the cartels, right?
Correct. So after some time, all 4 of the leaders of the Cali cartel, as well as other members of the Cali cartel, were wanted in Colombia on a variety of charges, whether that be drug trafficking, money laundering, testafarato, using frontmen, and several other charges. So what we did is we worked in conjunction with those Colombian security forces to target each one of those leaders, as well as other members, to arrest them and put them in prison in Colombia, because at the time in 1994, there was no extradition of Colombian nationals to the United States. Colombia has this relationship with the on and off with extradition. They had it for several years. It was banned. Pablo surrendered in 1991. And one of the reasons why he surrendered is because they changed the law that didn't allow extradition to the United States anymore. So as a result of that, after 1991, there was no extradition. So anytime that we arrested any of these major cartel figures, they were sent to prison in Colombia.
Hmm. So obviously, the leaders of the Cali cartel were wanted by the US government as well. So, what was their involvement with the United States? Did they smuggle drugs to the homeland in the US, or smuggle people, or what did they do in the US?
Well, the Cali Cartel was the largest drug trafficking organization in history. And at their height, they controlled 80 to 85% of the cocaine that reached U.S. soil and 90% worldwide. They dominated the cocaine trade on 6 continents, and they were earning billions and billions of dollars a year. And with the money that they were receiving from the cocaine trade, they were able to corrupt a great many people within the Colombian government, which allowed them to operate. That's why they were so successful for over 2 decades in Colombia. But a lot of stuff they did with their money too is they invested it back into the country. They were responsible for 40% of the economic development in Cali in the late 1980s. They owned banks, hotels, shopping malls. They financed hospitals. They owned a soccer team in Colombia. So they were extremely powerful. They corrupted government people at the highest of levels, which allowed them to insulate themselves. And that's why they were able to survive for as long as they did.
And after you concluded your mission there, did you bring down the whole cartel, or did it, get the new leadership, or what happened after you caught all of those leaders?
So three of the main leaders were arrested in the summer of 1995 after we were on the ground for about a year. Two of the brothers, Alberto Rodriguez Oruela was arrested in June of 1995. Jose Santa Cruz was arrested in July of 1995. Miguel Rodriguez was arrested in August of 1995. And the other leader, Pacho Herrera, was arrested or surrendered to Colombian authorities in September of 1996. And you also had the arrest of many, many other cartel leaders. So by the end of 1996, with the surrender of Pacho Herrera, they declared the Cali cartel dead, but they were still able to operate, but they were nowhere near what they were back in the early 90s. As we see, even to this present day, when you have one cartel that goes down, there's always another cartel kind of waiting in the wings to take their place. And that's exactly what happened in Colombia, because after the Cali cartel was pretty much dismantled, you had the North Valley cartel, which was laying in the wings and just waiting for that. And they finally took over and became one of the more powerful drug cartels in Colombia after the fall of the Cali cartel.
Yeah, and that's what I want to ask you, because it seems like anytime you bring down one criminal organization, the next one is about to take their place. How do you eliminate the root cause? Because we can do only so much to bring those people to justice, but if they keep rising up and all of these new cartels keep popping up on the map, then how do you solve the problem? Because it's just going to be endless. With your extraordinary experience down there and probably much better understanding than most people I could interview, how do you think we can solve this problem on the high level?
Well, it's a very difficult problem to solve because all of these drug cartels are located in countries other than the United States, right? You have these cartels located in Colombia, Venezuela, as well as Mexico. And these drug cartels or any other illegal drug trafficking organization or criminal organization, they can't exist and they can't function in these countries without corruption, right? They're able to exist, they're able to survive because they've been able to corrupt people in the highest levels of the governments. Unless you're completely eradicating corruption in these countries, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. It's also too, you have a resource problem. A lot of these countries don't have all the resources to go after and attack these cartels. They rely on US assistance, US resources, DEA and other federal agencies to be there to help them, to train them, to share intelligence with them, and to help them go after these drug cartels. So it's not, a single answer. It's a multi-pronged problem, as well as, we got to be honest here, right? The demand in the U.S., right? Without it's the law of supply and demand. And the reason that these organizations keep producing and exporting and selling these drugs is that there's a huge demand, not only here in the U.S., but in Europe as well. So I don't think it's a problem that's going to get resolved anytime soon.
Yeah, makes sense. And do you think that certain governments in Latin America might be helping those cartels in certain ways, especially the ones that are that see themselves as the enemies of the US, because that might be a great proxy to, to influence the United States through what cartels are doing.
Absolutely, and I think you see that present day with Venezuela. You have the Maduro administration as well as the Chavez administration before that, that is complicit with the drug trafficking, providing safe haven for these drug trafficking organizations as well as foreign terrorist organizations that they're giving safe haven to in Venezuela, such as the FARC and the ELN. They're continuing to provide these organizations with high-grade military weapons, and they're complicit in a lot of the drug trafficking and money laundering. So, yeah, I think you continue to see that. You see Bolivia as well, that, we don't have a DEA presence there anymore. These countries have decided that they don't want our cooperation, and, that just allows these organizations to go in there to set up shop. And if there is no operation going on or no enforcement operations targeting these cartels that are very strong, they're very rich, and they're very powerful, they're just going to continue to operate unimpeded with impunity. And that's, I think, what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the cartels, they don't really operate out of the United States, but there is definitely some kind of presence here, whether through, some, I don't know, recruits or people they smuggle through the border. And obviously now we can see certain arrests and deportations and stuff like that with the people related to those criminal organizations. But obviously, if you had a bunch of people who came in to the country without maybe proper vetting, or the government doesn't really know who came in, how big do you think is the problem with these cartels when it comes to people who are already in the US, and what kind of problems they can create here in the US?
Well, I think the open borders have caused, significant harm to the United States because you've seen for years that millions of people have come into the US. They haven't been vetted. We don't know who they are. Some could be terrorists, others have criminal records. And the problem is that these cartels that are operating in Mexico as well, they're going to do anything that they can to make money, right? That's their job. That's why they exist. And human trafficking is a major problem. It's a major moneymaker for these drug cartels in the United States. And once these individuals get into the United States, they don't have a professional background. They don't have, some of them, a good education. So what do? They resort to crime, and they resort to drug trafficking and other crimes to make money so that they can exist and survive. So it's a multifaceted problem.
So, what do you think the US should do to not only protect itself from, the current threats posed by the cartels, but also in the long run, how to prevent, things like that happening again, whether through drugs that come through the border or through the sea, or whether it's, any kind of other influence that these cartels might pose here. What do you think the strategy should be to fight the cartels?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer because there are so many things that we need to do, many of which we're not doing right now. But um, drug traffickers are, like I said before, they're able to exist in these countries because of corruption. And because of that, they become so powerful, so well armed. They have an inordinate amount of money and resources. So the U.S. needs to continue down the path that they're doing. I think you're seeing with some of these kinetic strikes that the government is doing in the Caribbean Sea, and now as well as the Eastern Pacific, which I talked about a few weeks ago, is that these drug trafficking organizations are very adaptable, right? They see what law enforcement is doing, and they're going to continue to try to counter and adapt to what we're doing. So you saw all of those strikes going on in the Caribbean corridor, which now you're going to see those organizations shifting over to the Eastern Pacific, to Western Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, and sending out these large boats again loaded with cocaine up around the Galapagos Island and into Central America and Mexico. So I think the U.S. needs to continue to do that. They need to make sure, obviously, that their intelligence is good, that they're striking these vessels that are known to have narcotics, and the information is very good. I think also securing the border as well. I think that has had an impact on the amount of drugs coming over land into the U.S. And, that And designating these organizations too as terrorist organizations brings a little bit more into play for what the U.S. can do. We can charge them with providing material support to these drug trafficking organizations, which has enhanced sentences. You can have sanctions on some of these countries, such as Mexico or China, with the exportation of chemicals into Mexico to make the fentanyl. Forming some of these task forces that they used to have, similar to like the Joint Terrorism Task Force up in New York, where you have these task forces consisting of a variety of different federal agencies as well as the intelligence community, and specifically targeting certain individuals or specific groups. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can continue to do, but it's a significant problem that, like I said, I don't think we're going to have it resolved anytime soon.
Yeah, and a big part of it, as you mentioned before, is the demand. Like if people use those drugs and they need them, they will get them through those organizations, and it's probably just a matter of price, because now that the border is closed, it might be more expensive, but those criminal organizations, they probably always find a way to make it happen. So do you think that communities on the local level in the US, if they, maybe through education or some other means, they try to fight this addiction issue, it could also decrease the amount of drugs that comes to the US? Or do you think it's not going to play that big of a role?
I think that we need to be better as a country in what you just talked about. I think that we need to go back to educating the youth in our country as early as, elementary and grade school about the dangers of drugs so that they can get that into their head. Drugs can kill, that they're very dangerous. I think we need to do a better job with treatment as well, sentencing, prosecution of these criminals. I think that there needs to be more prosecutors hired. I think that there needs to, go back to some of these minimum mandatory sentences to take the discretion away from the judges, that if you're caught with X amount of drugs, you get X sentence. And that's the way it is, unless you cooperate and you work off some of your, I think social media campaigns as well with some of these, actors, some of these athletes, to really get that message out, because I think that's what the youth will respond to. But I think, again, it's a multifaceted problem that we need to address through the education of the youth and a lot of the topics that we just talked about. But yeah, certainly we can do a much better job than we have been doing in the past.
We still have a few minutes before we finish the podcast, but before we wrap it up, first of all, thank you for sharing all of these stories and important advice. And I totally recommend viewers and listeners to check out Chris's book, which will be linked in the description, as well as the season 3 of Narcos on Netflix. But do you have a final message that you want to share with the viewers and the listeners?
Well, if any of your fans or viewers are fans of Narcos that like to read about, nonfiction, true crime stories, I think you would really enjoy the After Escobar. We go into a lot of detail about, what we did while we were in Colombia, how we planned these operations, the challenges and obstacles that we faced, which were many. And I think it's just an interesting read where you can really get into some of the Colombian history too, as well, during the 80s and 90s, and to see how things evolved and how some of these cartels were able to gain such a strong foothold in Colombia. So, hopefully you can get out there, enjoy the book, and I'd be happy to come back on and definitely talk more about the book and anything else you have regarding what's going on in the world today, because it seems like it's changing daily.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Chris, thank you for joining the show today. Appreciate your openness and stories and perspectives. Definitely great stuff, and I'll be looking forward to do a part 2 here.
Awesome, Danny. Thank you. It's great to be with you today.